Imagine a morning where millions of Americans wake up to discover that the US dollar, the currency trusted by the entire planet, has suddenly collapsed the same way Zimbabwe's dollar once did. Prices that seemed normal yesterday now look impossible. A bag of rice costs more in the evening than it did at sunrise. People rush to spend money before it becomes worthless, and shelves empty within hours. It feels like a nightmare. But for Zimbabwe, this nightmare was once reality. And if it ever happened to the United States, the consequences would be far more explosive, far more global, and far more dangerous. The question sounds extreme, almost unbelievable, but it is one of the most important what-ifs of modern economics. What would actually happen if the US dollar collapsed in the same catastrophic way Zimbabwe's currency fell? How would it affect the average American, the government, the markets, and the rest of the world that depends on the dollar for stability? To understand this scenario, you must imagine a chain reaction so large that it touches everything from food prices to global politics. This is not just a financial crisis. It is a full-scale transformation of daily life. To grasp the scale, we must first look at how Zimbabwe collapsed. Zimbabwe didn't fall in a single day. It was a slow and painful decline triggered by government overspending, huge debts, corruption, and the central bank printing massive amounts of money without economic support. At first, inflation was manageable. Then it accelerated. Eventually, it reached the point where money was losing value by the hour. People needed bags of cash just to buy bread. Salaries meant nothing by the time workers reached home. The currency became so worthless that Zimbabwe had to print $100 trillion notes that still couldn't buy basic groceries. This collapse wasn't caused by lack of resources, but by the destruction of trust. Now imagine a currency collapse in the United States, a country far bigger, far richer, and far more globally connected. The US dollar is powerful today because the world believes in it. It is the backbone of international trade, used in oil markets, global banking, and cross-border transactions. Over 190 countries depend on it. But this power also creates a weakness. If trust in the dollar disappears, the world economy doesn't just stumble, it shakes violently. Unlike Zimbabwe, a US collapse would not remain local. It would send shockwaves into every continent, ending the economic system the world relies on. The first sign inside the US would be hyperinflation. Money would lose value much faster than prices could adjust. Everyday goods like milk, bread, vegetables, rice, and fuel would suddenly cost double or triple within days. Wages would stay the same, but living costs explode. People rush to stores to spend money before it becomes worthless. Savings built over decades disappear almost overnight. Retirement accounts shrink to nothing. Even the middle class becomes financially helpless. Zimbabwe went through this exact stage. But the US, with its massive population and advanced economy, would feel it even harder. Next comes the collapse of the banking system. As the public panics, banks freeze withdrawals to prevent a complete run on their cash reserves. ATMs display out of service nationwide. Online banking crashes from overwhelming traffic. People cannot access their own savings, and distrust spreads like wildfire. The stock market crashes harder than 2008 and 1929 combined, wiping out trillions in a single stroke. Companies lose value instantly. Investors flee into physical assets, and the financial heart of the world stops beating. Zimbabwe's stock market became useless during its collapse. But the US crash would drag the entire global system down with it. Government debt becomes another explosive problem. The US owes more than $34 trillion. Foreign countries holding that debt would panic and dump it instantly to avoid losses. This collapses the government's ability to borrow money. Suddenly, the US cannot pay salaries, military expenses, or public services. Federal programs shut down. Infrastructure projects stop. Hospitals and services suffer. The strongest government in the world becomes financially paralyzed, just as Zimbabwe's government once was. But in America's case, the shock would echo across global finance. As the currency weakens, the next crisis hits. Imports stop coming. The U.S. depends heavily on foreign products: electronics, vehicles, medicines, machinery, raw materials, clothing, and even basic foods. If the dollar collapses, foreign countries refuse to accept it. Imports freeze instantly. Shelves become empty. Pharmacies run out of medicine. Factories shut down because parts no longer arrive. Gas stations run dry. This leads to nationwide chaos. Zimbabwe also faced severe shortages, but America's large population and technological dependence make the situation worse. Millions could struggle to find essential items. With poverty rising and shortages worsening, society begins to break apart. Crime increases. Looting becomes common in large cities. People fight over limited supplies. Grocery stores and fuel stations need police protection. Protests erupt nationwide, and clashes with law enforcement become frequent. As people stop trusting the financial system, they turn to alternative forms of money. Gold and silver become valuable again. Cryptocurrencies rise sharply as people try to store value digitally. Some states may begin issuing their own temporary currencies to maintain order. Local economies break into smaller financial zones. Zimbabwe experienced similar outcomes, but in the U.S., it would feel like a national fracture. The global consequences would be equally devastating. Countries around the world rely on the dollar as the main currency for trade. If it collapses, global markets fall into chaos. Oil producers switch to gold or other currencies. China, Russia, and India quickly push new financial systems. International companies fail because their assets were tied to dollars. Economies in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East struggle to function. A global recession begins, deeper and harsher than the Great Depression. Billions of people are affected. The world economy has never existed without the dollar at the center. Its collapse forces every country to rethink its future. Eventually, after a long and painful period, the United States may be forced to replace the old currency entirely. A new digital dollar, gold-backed system, or international monetary unit could emerge. The country slowly stabilizes, but the recovery takes years. Life gradually returns to normal, but the global order changes forever. The United States would no longer be the unquestioned economic superpower it once was. Zimbabwe eventually restored stability by abandoning its old currency and adopting foreign ones. America may take a similar path, but with much larger political and global consequences. In the end, the collapse of the U.S. dollar would not simply be a financial event. It would be a turning point in world history. It would erase wealth, disrupt societies, and transform the entire global economic system. The rise and fall of currencies teach one powerful truth: money only has value as long as people trust it. When trust breaks, even the strongest currencies can fall like dominoes. The collapse of the dollar would mark the end of one era and the birth of another, reminding the world that no empire, no system, and no currency is unbreakable.